warm welcome to Insight. At last, after a lapse of 54 years, the flag of the Republic of Cuba was once again raised in Washington. A little later, a US flag too will be similarly raised in Havana. This formally puts an end to long years of estrangement and hostility that have marked the relations between the two neighbors. For Cuba in particular, this has been a trying time, what with the sanctions and embargo and blockades and so on. There is a sense of marked relief in Havana, for even though the restrictions still stay, this way has now been opened for the squeeze to be gradually eased. Today in Insight, we discuss the US-Cuba rapprochement and the possibilities that this event now opens up. And to discuss US-Cuba relations, we have with us in the studios an eminent panel. Please welcome Professor Sreeram Chaulia, Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome to the program, Professor Chaulia. I'll continue with you. How do you view this development of reopening of embassies and diplomatic ties being restored between the US and Cuba?
It's earth-shattering. It's historic. There's no question about it. I think it's going to change the politics of the Western Hemisphere as a whole. It's going to bring back America, United States, into Latin America after it had become marginalized for a long time. It's going to reimagine the meaning of what is community and region for everyone, because Cuba had been deliberately excluded by the Americans while the rest of the region wanted Cuba in. So I think in terms of goodwill, I mean, look at the reactions of the regional heavyweights. Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, said that we never thought we will see this day, this moment, And for her to say this, it's very grudging, because these are all socialists, of different hues, and they all had lot of sympathies for the Castro regime. For them to acknowledge Nicolas Maduro, president of Venezuela, who doesn't miss an opportunity to accuse Yankee imperialism, is saying Obama is a brave man and he took a brave step and he made a historical correction.
Yeah, in fact, Cuba has been a uniting factor for
the region,
right?
Except for the fact that the US was not part of that and was a spoiler. So now I think it's going to mean a lot for the whole region. So while we can look at it from a bilateral prism, from the larger Western Hemisphere point of view, from the larger, there is a summit of the Americas. That's where in fact Raul Castro and Obama had their first sit-down meeting. So all these things, I think, we're going to go in the history books, and they're going to show the value of engagement. The Obama doctrine is supposed to be, we will engage, but we'll keep our capabilities, and that's what he's showing.
Right.
Be it with Iran, be it with Myanmar, and now with Cuba. And all of these, I think, from the Cuban side also. Remember, economically, they're not doing so well of late. They were dependent on Venezuela for oil, subsidized oil, and they have been. That has come down because Venezuela itself is facing a macroeconomic crisis. The old Russian support is no longer there. So Cuba also needs, they have done some limited opening under Raul Castro. I want to place all of this in the context of what Raul Castro calls, we are in a state of historical transcendence. He's announced that he's going to leave office to 2018.
Right.
He's 84 now. Fidel is long retired, and the next generation is anointed a person called Miguel Diaz-Canel, and he's supposed to be more pragmatic. So in a way, I think all these openings, it may not lead to what the expectations of the hawkish crowd in Washington is, which is that Cuba should become democratic. But what it may become is more like a China or a Vietnam or a Laos, or even some of these socialist countries in Latin America, which are relatively more moderate and which in a way mix capitalism and socialism. I think that's what the street sentiment is also in Cuba. The younger generation, they're not that enthusiastic about the old defiance. In fact, they want to integrate closer, and that's the big message, that we can all be one big family.
Professor, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, the constituencies for peace have expanded on both sides. There is an engaged Cuba coalition now in the US, backed by a lot of big agribusinesses, Archer Daniels, Caterpillar, and so on. Like, a lot of them see Cuba also as a market opportunity, because they've been deprived of the trade, of the export opportunity. And then, there is also the Latino. If you see the politics that Obama has done with the Latino community, clearly he has won over a lot of them by liberalizing the immigration. So the backlash from the so-called Miami hawkish, the anti-Castro bloc, is not that significant for the Democratic Party. If Jeb Bush runs for president, for example, they've calculated, he's from Florida, was the former governor of Florida, so clearly he will likely carry that state anyway. Hillary Clinton will not need that vote. So I think overall, I think they're pretty confident about doing this, and I don't see how this momentum can now be reversed, especially because of the, as I said, the transition that's coming in Cuba itself. So what we're going to see is, step by step, it's going to be a gradual normalization, but it's coming, and the constituencies that are behind them are getting more active and engaged. In the past, what used to be the case was that the anti-Castro lobby in Miami, in Florida, was a minority, but it was very vocal and well concentrated. Therefore, it could influence opinion.
Okay.
So eventually, even the embargo will go. It's a question of whether, not when. And I think that's good news for people in that part of the world, because the thing is, these things are pretty outdated anyway. In fact, Cuba was never fully isolated anyway. I mean, the Europeans were trading with them, the Latin Americans, Africa, we trade with Cuba. So it's never been an issue that they're completely isolated.
Okay.
So I think this, in a way, I would say the advantages are greater for the United States than for Cuba, and I don't think that Cuba was so desperate. But nonetheless, it will help improve living standards, access to technology, access to hardware, exactly. These kind of things, even motion pictures, a little bit more of a private sector will not do them harm. Right now, Raul Castro has done very, very moderate reforms.
Okay.
So the more this process happens, Cuba will change, and that's for the good for both societies.
Professor Chaulia, this rapprochement between the US and Cuba, what kind of changes is it going to spur within Cuba? Is it going to become, a market-driven economy now? Are we going to see all kinds of restrictions go?
Well, the Chinese have already invented curious terms like market socialism and socialism with Chinese characteristics and so on to explain the mixed economy. I think Cuba is going to go in that direction.
Okay.
And I think the Castros still have a lot of legitimacy. And unless somebody, the successor who comes in, really mismanages this process, I think this current regime still has some legs to go. So it's not going to collapse under the weight of engagement.
Okay.
But what you will see is, I think they're going to be impacted by the developments in the region. If you look at the region, the extreme left, the Chavistas and all of them, who Chavez, by the way, was like an adopted son of Fidel Castro, and they were so close when Chavez was alive. All of the extreme left is facing setbacks, and increasingly you are finding that more and more regimes are becoming are turning a little away from extreme left towards the center. And in that sense, I think Cuba has caught the wind, because they realize that, in a way, it's like, you exist in a community, in a society, and if everybody else is going in one direction, you can't be in the other side, right? So it's that dynamic which is going to also propel them. So one is engagement with America, the re-engagement. The other is the regional trend away from extreme socialism, and all of these are going to mean that there's going to be an adjustment. But if you see, in a larger sense, what have the Castros achieved through this process? I mean, one must place it on record. They have outlived 7 or 8 presidents, American presidents, and they have survived. For them, that itself is an example, and they're going to use this as a legitimacy claim that while for Obama it's legacy, for the Castros it's also legacy, right? They are also at the end of their long political careers, and they will say that we are transitioning Cuba into safer hands, and we've even finally overcome this ostracization by the United States.
Professor Chaulia.
George Kennan wrote something in 1948, one of the premier foreign service officers. We must prevail and we must dominate Latin America. That mindset has finally ended. The Cold War has finally ended. It's a great time for the Western Hemisphere.
Alright, on that note, it's time for me to thank all my guests for coming to the studios. It was a pleasure having you here. That's it for now in this edition of Insight. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.